Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. Trinway Silks is where weavers, spinners, knitters, and stitchers find the silk they love. Select from the largest variety of silk spinning fibers, silk yarn, and silk threads and ribbons at trinwaysilks.com. You'll discover a rainbow of colors thoughtfully hand-dyed in Colorado. Love natural? Trinway's array of wild silks provide choices beyond white. If you love silk, you'll love Trinway Silks, where superior quality and customer service are guaranteed. Follow the threads to France on an 8-day tour of the rich traditions of French textiles. From tapestry of the Middle Ages to contemporary haute couture, our trips immerse you in the colors, forms, and techniques of half a millennium of textile fabrication and design. Guided visits are coupled with hands-on experiences in Paris, Versailles, and Calais. To learn more about this fiber adventure, visit followthethreads.com. I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Anne Marrow. From her beginnings as a production punch needle rug maker, Amy Oxford has advanced the craft as a teacher, author, supplier, and developer of the Oxford punch needle tool. So Amy, thanks for being with me.
Thank you for inviting me, Anne.
I think that I'm seeing punch needle almost everywhere I look now. So it seems like it's having a moment, but this is not a new thing for you. Can you tell me a little bit about your origins in this fiber art?
Sure. I started out as a weaver, and in 1982, friends of mine, Cynthia and Preston McAdoo, took over Preston's punch needle rug hooking business, and it was a cottage industry. It started in Maine, but moved to North Bennington, Vermont. And when I saw the rugs, they had everything that I loved about the weaving, the texture, the warmth of the fibers, but they had the most gorgeous designs and hand-dyed yarn. And I've always loved to draw, so it combined the warmth of the texture with the beautiful graphic images and designs. So I was drawn right away.
I've been wondering, what is this called? Because I tend to think of it as punch needle, but we don't usually name a craft after the tool. So you use the word punch needle rug hooking. Is that what you think of it?
Yeah, we use the word punch needle rug hooking because punch needle embroidery became really popular. So when you say punch needle, people who do punch needle embroidery call themselves punch needle, and people who do punch needle rug hooking call themselves punch needle artists. So it's a way to distinguish the two.
What's different besides the scale?
Yeah, that's the main thing. Punch needle embroidery has a very small needle and uses embroidery floss, either 1, 2, 3 strands. I'm not an expert on it at all, but it's very small. The technique is the same in that you work from the back and you're punching your tool in, whether it's the teeny embroidery needle or a rug punch, and you're forming loops on the opposite side. The punch needle embroidery is called igolachkoi. That originates in Russia.
Wow. So what is the difference between punch needle and rug hooking? One of them is like what side you are. I should say, what's the difference between punch needle rug hooking and, the kind of rug hooking that my grandfather used to do?
Sure. Sure. So the kind that your grandfather used to do was probably what we now call traditional rug hooking. And it was done with a crochet-like hook. And what you do with that is you can use yarn or cut strips of fabric or whatever you have. The original hooked rugs, they did use, whatever they had, right down to the individual little strands of burlap. They didn't waste anything. They were made from old clothing. And what you do with that is you pull up your loops. You have a backing. Originally, it was jute or burlap. And what you do is you work from the right side and you pull up one loop at a time. So it's up to the skill of the rug hooker to make the loops all the same height. So you wind up a loop pile on the side you're working on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then the difference with punch needle rug hooking is if you flip that over, you're working on the back and you're punching your needle down, and every time you push it down, it pushes out an end. And when you lift it up folds that in to make it into a loop. So they're both making loops. Just one is pulling them from the top and the other is pushing them from the bottom. So it got the name punch needle rug hooking. It's not rug hooking because you're not using a hook, but because the result is the same with a loopy pile, that was a way to identify what it was. And a lot of people think that traditional rug hooking was done with strips of fabric and punch needle rug hooking was done with yarn. And that generally is true, but you can use both fibers with either tool.
So the tool itself makes a big difference in that it sets the length, right?
Yes, if you're using it correctly, always pushing it down all the way and not lifting up too high. Takes a bit to get used to that, but not very long. It will make all the loops the right height for you. So they're pretty interesting to see side by side. Some people make pieces using both techniques with both the tools. So you might punch an object like a sheep and make it taller, work from the back, and then work from the front to pull loops for the background. Yeah.
Cool.
So it's kind of fun to combine the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that your friends had taken over this business. How did you fall in love with it or get involved?
I got involved in kind of a roundabout way. I went to Bennington College, and when I got there, I was terribly homesick. And also, I moved from England to Vermont, and everything that I owned was in 2 trunks. And they were accidentally sent to Tehran, and I received 2 trunks that belonged to an Iranian lady. So there I was at college with nothing and terribly homesick. So I applied for a little note I saw on a bulletin board, babysitter wanted. And, who goes to college to babysit? But it was, it was a way to find a family. And it turned out it was Cynthia and Preston McAdoo. And Preston was working as a car mechanic at the time. He's a trained painter. But when he showed me the first hook rug that he made, well, as I mentioned, I just loved it. So I asked for a job, and he gave me a lesson. It took about an hour for him to show me all the basics. And he said, well, take this piece home, make it. And if it looks good when you come back, you can have a job. So I worked for them as a home rug hooker. In their heyday, they had over 50 rug hookers, and we all worked in our homes. So it was a fantastic job for young mothers or people who wanted to work at home. You would get a pattern drawn on the rug backing, which was cotton monk's cloth, a big bag of yarn, a map showing what colors went where, and you just worked on your own time. And it paid well and was really fun to do. And if you showed artistic interest or talent, they gave you really fun rugs to do. They might say, okay, make this sky. Here's 8 colors of blue and some white for clouds. Put the clouds wherever you want. So there was a lot of freedom in it. And I got to do some exciting pieces for them, like a reproduction of a painting in the Bennington Museum, for example. So yeah, that's how I started with them. And as I say, I really loved it. It's very meditative and super fun to do.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Have you heard of the Woolly Thistle? We're a brick and click yarn shop specializing in non-superwash woolly wool yarns from the UK and Europe. We have fast and free shipping, and you can check us out at thewoollythistle.com, 2 L's in woolly, and let us do the international shipping and tariffs so you don't have to.
And now back to the show. So one time, maybe 25 years ago, I was doing something with T-shirts and decided that I should make some use of the remnants. And I thought, I will hook a rug. I will hook a bath mat. And I found it meditative. And I found it so meditative that I gave myself tendinitis in my elbow.
Oh, dear.
And from what I understand, making it comfortable is something that has been a big element of your life in punch needle.
Yes. So when I worked for McAdoo, I might punch 4 or 5 hours a day, but not every day. Then I started my own business in 1985, Red Clover Rugs. because I really wanted to do my own designs and to teach. And at that time, there were only 5 companies in the whole United States that were actually teaching punch needle rug hooking, and only a few who were selling supplies. So I thought, well, let's start a business selling the supplies. And I made kits and taught and did custom work, really did everything I could think of to make ends meet. And the commissions were wonderful to make, but with my own business, I would regularly punch, 8 hours a day, and often, had to pull an overnighter, to get a commission out. So I had some wonderful commissions, and commission work was exciting for me because you get to make things that you would never make otherwise, things that wouldn't occur to you to make, colors you wouldn't think of combining. So it was a great challenge to figure out how to make someone else's design and concept also beautiful for yourself, if that makes sense. Oh, but anyway, I digress. So I made a really fun stair runner. It was 28 feet long, 16 steps. The design was on the risers that showed the whole history of the family, starting with their childhood pets, where they were born, a riser for each child, risers of their homes, their weddings, all of their special events. And then the treads had a pretty pattern. So anyway, I made that. And then I made an 8.5 by 11 foot rug for someone's living room that went under a big glass table. And I had so much fun making that. It was of a big oak tree, and it symbolized the strength of their family. And I, hid the initials in the background of everyone in the family. But anyway, that was an awful lot of punching. And I never had any soreness at all in my wrists or elbows because I was doing it all the time and I had built up the muscles. But when I got done making those two things, we were doing firewood, and I picked up a log. If you can imagine the log standing straight up, it was vertical, and I put my hand on top of it to lift it up, and something in my wrist just, went twang. And then my elbow went. So I wound up with carpal tunnel in my wrist and tendonitis in my elbows. And so I knew I wanted a better tool. And actually, I'd been daydreaming about a better tool for a really long time. When you're sitting making a rug for hours and hours and hours at a time, you have a lot of time to think, well, gosh, I don't really like plastic. I'm anti-plastic. Why don't we get a wooden handle and let's make the metal needle so it glides through better? And boy, if it was shaped a little bit differently, it would be so much more comfortable and more ergonomic. So I had wanted this tool for years, and anyone who was remotely interested, I would say, oh gosh, I have these ideas for a better tool. Wouldn't that be great? And if they were also a puncher, they would get just what I was talking about. And after about the 100th time, I said this to one of my students, and she said, Oh, well, my husband is an inventor, and he likes to work with fledgling inventors. He's an engineer, and I know he'd be able to help you. And because it's his hobby to help people, he'll do it for nothing. And my jaw just dropped because here's my dream, and I've always felt that if you were positive and sort of put things out there into the universe, that good things can happen. And so they really did. And his name was Greg Fremstead from Oregon. And Greg sent me prototypes, like in a week. I told him what I wanted. And because his wife, Barbara Benner, also punched, he had a clue. So he made me different handles, and we all tried them. I had everyone at McAdoo Rugs try them. We wound up with 2 prototypes. One we called the King and one the Queen, because they were sort of shaped like chess pieces. And the Queen won out, And yeah, he knew how to find all the manufacturers. Back then, it was before the internet. They had what they called the gray book, and you could look in it and it would show you, okay, well, here are all these wood turners. They're mostly in Maine. And here's the place to get the best electropolished stainless steel with tool and die makers. And, so he made it possible. So I had the idea, but he made my dreams come to life.
Now, was there a big community of people who were doing punching at that point? Because you mentioned that you were teaching and you had students, but it also sounds like people were just also really interested in having you do the work.
Well, when I started, I knew punchers at McAdoo Rugs. There was another really famous company in our world, the George Wells Ruggery in Long Island, New York, and a lot of people learned from Mr. Wells. There was a punch needle artist in Washington State, Gloria Krause, and a handful of other people, but no one was teaching. It wasn't a well-known craft at all. So that was part of my business plan, my scheme when I got started. It was easier to get a loan because there was no competition. No one was doing this. Only one store selling supplies. McAdoo's didn't teach. They just made rugs. So yeah, everywhere I went, people didn't know what it was. I had crowds around me at craft fairs, people saying, oh, what is that? So I made it my mission to have it better known, really, just because it's such a great craft. And with the new tool, and I wrote a book, I just really wanted to spread the word.
Now, I first heard of you through the tool. I knew that somebody who was Amy Tyler, who's a hand spinner, was creating something with punch needle rug hooking. And she mentioned the Oxford hook, the Oxford needle. And so it seems like that was really a very distinguishing characteristic.
Yeah. Well, my last name was Oxford, and it sounds so, I don't know, reliable, Oxford University, Oxford Dictionary. Gosh. Mm-hmm. So that was the name, and it's been quite the journey. My image that I wanted to convey, I guess now they call it a brand.
Yes.
The brand that I wanted was I collect antique punch needles. And if you find one with the tool and the box and the directions, that's a real score. That's what collectors are looking for. So I wanted mine to be, a gorgeous, well-made tool in a really cool box with a nice handbook. And I found a graphic designer who was fantastic. And I wanted it to look old-fashioned. And one of my most exciting moments was I was buying some yarn from a mill down in South Carolina. And the gentleman who owned the mill said, wait, what? You're Amy Oxford? Wait, I thought that tool was 100 years old. So that made me so happy, because I wanted it to look like it was reliable. So, yeah, we pulled it off.
So the comfort of the tool is really just based on your own experience and understanding. It's not that there was some sort of external ergonomics expert. I don't know was there ergonomics experts back then?
Well, Greg Fremstead and I knew what it needed to have to be more ergonomic. The punch needle that I learned on was fantastic. It was called the Craftsman's punch needle. And it was a great tool because you could adjust it to 10 different height settings. So you could make a loop anywhere from 1/4 inch to 3/4 of an inch. But it was shaped like a pencil. So when you held on to it, you could hold it in one way. If you think about how you hold a pencil, but then you're lifting the pencil up, down, up, down, up, down. So you're pretty much using the same hand motion to go up and down. So I said, okay, we need a ridge. So you have something to push down on because that'll relieve hand strain. And then I thought, okay, well, we need some kind of a bump on it so you have something to pull on. So it went from being just a cylindrical sort of a pencil-like shape with only a teeny little lip to rest on to having a nice big shelf to push on and a bump to pull on. And so I knew what it needed. He had the lathe and the know-how to make all these prototypes. And we tested it to see which were the best features to include.
You're describing it, and it sounds to me a little bit like the pencil version is kind of like a jackhammer, and it doesn't sound very pleasant to turn your hand into a jackhammer.
Well, it's fine if you're just doing a little bit. It's just like for a professional punching that many hours, you really notice it. Like it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't notice unless you did a lot of it. The craftsman's punch needle had a little seam where the, plastic was joined. And so you'd get a blister. So if you have like a little thread in your shoe that's sticking out, you don't notice it if you're walking to the grocery store, but when you're hiking the long trail, you get blisters. So it's kind of like that. The tool really was more user-friendly for whether you're using it for short, stints or whole big rugs.
You mentioned that teaching was something that you wanted to do from the very beginning. And then you mentioned that you'd written a book. You've written a number of books. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about the Oxford Company is that you have a formal school with deans and a curriculum.
Yes. So originally, I didn't want to teach at all. It hadn't even occurred to me to teach. And McAdoo Rugs was invited to teach a class for the Vermont State Crafts Center at Frog Hollow here in Middlebury, where they were having an exhibit of their rugs. And they asked me if I would do it. And I said, no, I really don't want to. I don't know how to teach punch needle rug hooking. And they said, well, you have to do it because you live closer than anyone else. Because they were a couple hours away and I was only an hour away. So I said, all right, I'll do it. So I went and showed the beautiful rugs of theirs in the gallery and went to teach my class. And they kept asking me all these questions, how do you do this? How do you do that? And I kept answering the questions and I thought, oh my gosh, they think I know what I'm talking about. And by the end of the class, I thought, oh, wait, I do know. I do know what I'm talking about. So I loved the teaching, which really surprised me. And I loved how excited people got about it. And the thing I love most is it's a really easy craft to learn. It's really very forgiving. If you make a mistake, it's easy to pull out and correct, much easier than, say, pulling out needlepoint. So it's a really satisfying thing to learn and to teach because the results are so quick. Some people call it instant gratification with wool because it's really fast. And one of the things I love about it is it's very painterly. It's easy to draw a curve, for example, whereas with needlepoint, you're working on a grid. So to get a curve, you have to go up, over, up, over, up, over. And this, you just can punch a nice, graceful curve.
But the school has become more than just you as an individual teaching, right? It's become this sort of larger curriculum. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. So after I taught that class, I taught there at Frog Hollow again for several years and then at other schools. And I wound up having the pleasure of teaching around the country and in Canada and the UK. And after 29 years of traveling to teach, my dream was always to start my own school because I love to teach, but everywhere I went, I had to schlep all the supplies. So I always said, when I get older, I'll start my own school. And one day I thought, oh, wait a minute, I am older. So I found a beautiful farmhouse and started my own school in Cornwall, Vermont, my hometown. And when I retired and sold the business, I was delighted that the new owners wanted to keep the school going. And they made it better than I ever could have imagined. They took it to a whole nother level. At the Oxford Rug Cooking School, when I ran it, we did have guest instructors come in, and my coworker Heidi Whipple and I taught together. And so it was small, and now they have multiple teachers. I knew when I first started teaching that we needed more teachers and we needed teachers around the country. So I came up with a scheme to have a teacher certification program. So in 1994, I started teaching teachers. So those are the teachers that are now teaching at the Oxford Rug Cooking School.
That's a big endeavor. I think a lot of people, when they're teaching, think about their own schedules, how much they can do, how much they want to fill up. But building something out that is so much bigger than what you can accomplish on your own, I think is a kind of forward-thinking and ambitious undertaking.
Well, when I started, it was really small, and that's the thing. It sounds ambitious later on, but you start small, and it doesn't seem as ambitious when you've never done it before and your first class only has 6 students, But I didn't know if anyone would even come. It sort of took a lot of nerve to think that I had the skill and the know-how to even offer such a thing. So when people really believed in it, it was so encouraging. And they started teaching right away and were wonderful teachers, and their students loved it. And it was a great program. And I'm so excited because it's still going stronger than ever. We've trained advanced Oxford certified instructors. I realized when I retired, well, wait a minute, there has to be other people to teach teachers. So we set up a more advanced program for what we called our advanced Oxford certified instructors. So now we have them teaching other teachers.
Now, you mentioned that it's easy to learn this. What are the next steps? Aside from developing a teacher curriculum, what would you say is kind of an advanced technique in this?
Oh, well, when I worked for McAdoo, we used 1 height loop in the Craftsman's punch needle. We used the number 8 punch needle that made the 1/2-inch loop. And as I went along, I just was so excited to try new things, to try strips of fabric in the punch. And when I started teaching at a wonderful craft school in Ludlow, Vermont, Fletcher Farm School for the Arts and Crafts, it's the oldest residential craft school in the country. Actually, one of their founders was Robert Frost, the poet. Anyway, it's a great school. And I had to come up with something to tempt my students to come back every summer. So I just kept trying new things. And if they worked, I would teach them. So an example of a more advanced technique would be, as I mentioned, using strips of fabric in the punch needle. Gee, let's try all kinds of yarns. Let's try a boucle. Let's try silks. Let's try novelty yarns with all kinds of slubs. Let's try cotton. And, wait, what happens if you put these 5 different yarns in the punch needle at once? Oh my gosh, look at that texture. Okay, let's try sculpting using different heights and clipping all the loops. And, well, wait a minute, traditional rug hooking is famous for their beautiful fine shading. Can we do that with punch needle? Why, yes. Yes, we can. Well, wait a minute. Can we dye beautiful yarns to do things we've never done before? Sort of ikat kind of patterns. And so one thing just kind of led to another. And it's so exciting because as the craft has grown, the new wave of punch needle artists aren't limited by the quote rules that I started with. So it's so exciting to see what they're doing. They're using the back for the front and punching with both sides and making really long stitches to look like embroidery stitches. And so there's lots of more advanced techniques.
It seems like one of the nice things about starting off is that you have, a design to fill in. You have, it's not a grid exactly, but you have a sort of a finite steps you can take a certain length, but then you can shade colors, you can create different heights. So it's like as you go on, you can refine things a little bit more and make them a little bit more nuanced.
Definitely. You can make them more nuanced and really take it to all different levels. I mean, also the patterns can get so interesting. You want to start with a simpler, smaller design to make sure that you like it, a star or something like that. But you can go on to do such exciting things, much more intricate patterns with all different kinds of techniques.
When I think of traditional rug hooking, I suppose, but the earlier examples, a lot of them tended to be that New England look where the colors are fairly bold and the shapes are, what you think of as those classic country or colonial shapes. But then Simone Vovodine did a project for the cover of Piecework over the summer or the fall, which has shading of different colors. It has different heights to create this Van Gogh-inspired iris. And it's a totally different style from what I would have expected any kind of rug hooking to look like.
That was a beautiful piece. And Simone's the dean of the Oxford Rug Hooking School. And I recommended her because she's just such a serious student and a talented artist and a tremendous teacher. But yes, seeing what Simone was doing, imagine all the different artists and what they're doing with it. It's really open for interpretation in whole new ways. Traditional rug hooking started in the 1830s in New England and the Canadian Maritimes. And so the earlier rugs that you see were drawn by the individual rug makers. It was before commercial patterns were available. Punch needle rug hooking started in 1881. So it's not brand new.
But not ancient either.
No, it's about 50 years newer than traditional rug hooking.
So you mentioned the designs, and do most people who are working with these, are they mostly working with designs that other people have created, or do you find that a lot of people are sort of sketching their own and filling those in?
I think when most people start, they like the comfort and the ease of using a pattern that's already drawn for them. And my goal as a teacher has always been to start them there, if that's where they're comfortable starting, and then encourage them to branch off on their own. I'll give you an example. I have a wonderful student named Barbara, and she started not really having any confidence in her own artistic abilities. So she started with a kit. So the yarn was chosen, the pattern was chosen, and she punched it. And that gave her so much more confidence that the next time she picked her own colors. She had a ready drawn design, but she picked her own colors. And then after she'd done that a few times, she thought, oh, gosh, I think I'd like to do my own design. And she saw a greeting card that she loved and got permission from the artist and put that design onto backing herself and picked the colors. And then she wanted to design her own. So it has a lot of room for growth and encourages creativity, I think. Yeah.
Is there something that you think makes a particularly good design for punch needle?
Oh, gosh. That's a whole long conversation. For a beginner, something small is easier. There are sort of basic rules of thumb that I tell beginners. One is keep it simple. The other is keep in mind that it has to be backwards. So if you have lettering in it, that has to be backwards. Of course, it doesn't matter with a floral or something like that, but keep that in mind that it needs to be backwards. And also if you're using, our rug yarn is quite thick. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick. So I call it the pinky suggestion. Don't draw any lines thinner than your pinky because the yarn is too fat. So those are some tips for beginners. But once you get going, the sky's the limit.
I was just thinking about if there are open spaces and how you fill them in, because I suppose just like pencil strokes, how you move those loops, how you move the tool along must make a pretty big difference.
It makes a really big difference. It won't show up as much with a solid color as it will with a multicolored yarn, like a variegated yarn. Your stitch direction won't show as much, but that's one of the things I love about it is the maker has a lot of choices to make about how you're going to fill something in. If you have, a star, for example, we mentioned a star before. Are you going to punch it horizontally, vertically? Are you going to start on the outside shape and work your way in? So that's one of the things that people really like about it is within the designs, there's a lot of choices you could make about how you want to fill it in.
So when you decided to make a line of rug yarns or a couple lines of rug yarns at this point, right? What are the properties that you are looking for in those yarns? Being a spinner, I'm always interested in yarn structure.
So when I started, we only used rug yarn, and the McAdoo yarn that I loved is a 3-ply rug yarn, and you want a very coarse yarn. So you don't want it to be fluffy, or A, it won't last, and B, if you have a nice stiff loop, if you know what I mean, loops won't punch through other loops. So if you're making a sweater, you would want a nice soft merino, for example. If you're making a rug, you want a much coarser fleece, like a Lincoln or a Suffolk, something stronger. So my dream rug yarn is coarse and a tight spin.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's classic. There are lots of wools that they call rug wools. So
yes, and it's confusing because there are lots of rug wools, like for weavers. It's the definition of a rug yarn, a rug wool. It depends on what kind of rug you're making. As I went along, I wanted to make finer things, more detailed things. So I started using worsted weight yarns. So that's something that I really love to do. And I'd always wanted a worsted weight yarn. Mm-hmm. In 2014, I purchased a great company. My friend Sarah Berghoff started a business called Violet Jane Rug Yarn with these fantastically wonderful variegated yarns, one-of-a-kind dyed yarns. And she was ready to retire, so we took over the dyeing, and I've always wanted the fine yarns. So we were able to use those dye formulas to make corresponding fine yarns and came up with lots of formulas of our own.
So do people mostly find your work through kits now or classes, or are they sort of, there's so many different ways of coming to punch needle rug hooking and especially your work?
It's so exciting now. In 2016, we had the very good fortune, unbelievable fortune of being discovered by an influencer on Instagram, Aruna, with the company Bukau in Toronto. And we went from being a pretty obscure craft. We might have sold 1,000, maybe 2,000 punch needles a year, to having sales go up overnight 640% and selling 1,000 to 2,000 a month. So that really revolutionized the craft. And all of a sudden it was everywhere. So I adore Aruna. And our demographic before then was probably sort of 40 to 90-year-olds. And with Aruna, it's more 20, starting in their 20s and especially their 30s. So one of her followers said, Aruna, you've made punch needle cool again, and she really did. But so many of her followers had not seen it. The first post was fascinating because, it's like, KS, was ist das? All over the world, people had not seen it. So her designs were modern, appealing, fresh. So she really did a lot to make it popular. So anyway, that's a long answer. So now it's everywhere. It's all over social media. If you Google it, it pops up everywhere. Yeah, it's gone from being incredibly obscure to being more mainstream. But still not probably mainstream, but being more well-known.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you had sold the business, and yet I do find you still at your desk.
So you were kind enough to ask me to be on your podcast. So I came to visit the Oxford company to use their equipment because my house has terrible internet. So I asked if I could
dragged you back to work.
No. I get to visit my buddies here. It's wonderful to be back. And Dave set it all up for me. So yeah, I'm happy to do it. Thank you for asking me.
But you've passed the company on to new hands.
Yes. Yep. I was ready to retire and spend more time with my grandchildren and my family. And it was really challenging because during COVID, the prices of lumber went up. So the cost of our wood handles doubled. The cost for the metal needles went way up. And we were no longer able to manufacture the tools at a price that was really affordable for the public. So we had a lot of trouble. We had 9 employees in our heyday. Originally, it was a whole lot smaller. It started with my former husband and I making them on our kitchen table.
Oh my goodness.
Then when we went viral, up to 9 employees. And it was really scary and really disappointing because I had to start laying people off when sales went down. And we got knocked off by 2 companies in China, a company in Korea. But I had the excellent advice of a family friend to get it patented, which I had never done before. So I quickly applied for patents, and I was lucky enough to get a design patent and a utility patent. Anyway, I was starting to put all my own savings into it and still completely believed in it more than ever. But there needed to be a way to make a more affordable tool. So in 2024, I sold the company, the Oxford Punch Needle and the Violet Jane Rug Yarn, the Oxford Rug Hooking School. And did I say Violet Jane Rug Yarn? Yes. And the McAdoo patterns to a terrific company and a wonderful family, the Jane family in India. They're the owner of the company Knit Pro. So they were a terrific fit. They're a wonderful family business. They are really supportive of women. Their mission is to empower women. They're sustainable, just a super company. But they were a really good fit because they're the world leader in knitting needle manufacturing. So they already knew how to make wooden tools beautifully. And they do all the metal work, the wood turning, they make the boxes, they print the handbooks. So they were poised and ready and just hit the ground running. And I just feel so fortunate to have been able to find a good home for it. I never thought I would sell out of the country, but we couldn't find American buyers who could take it on. And they saw the potential of it. The Jane family did.
And actually, I believe I was in a booth at H&H and I think one of their nieces who looked like she could have been in her early 20s, very early 20s. I think she might have been a college student, was super enthusiastic. And she was saying, no, let me show it. Let me do it. And she just had this vibrancy and excitement about her. So she was sort of taking it on and in a purely staid trade show.
So that would have been Amira Jane. And she loves punching so much so that she's taken the teacher certification program. And she's wonderful because she has that fresh perspective and has given us ideas for things we never would have thought of. It never would have occurred to me that a neon yarn might be popular, but you bet, that bright day glow color palette was really popular.
I find it really exciting to find a use for long wool, coarse wool, rug wool, because I think there's not enough market for wool generally. And certainly among the crafters, it's pretty easy to talk about fine and soft wool, but celebrating the uses of this kind of wool that was bred for these characteristics. And I know that around the world and in India, they certainly have wool that they need to find a use for. So yeah.
I think one of my favorite classes that I ever taught was for a New England Hand Spinners Guild. And I invited everyone to bring scraps of different hand spun yarn, just to bring a whole assortment of things to play with. And it was such fun to see all the different yarns. And, you don't have to use a rug yarn. Like if you're making a wall hanging, for example, it doesn't have to be as durable. Or if you're making a bedside rug, you don't need as sturdy a yarn as you would for a high traffic area. But it was a great class because it was such fun to see all their yarns. But one of the reasons I loved it so much is that they left behind so many, what to them was scraps. And to me was this treasure trove of yarns. So yeah, spinning hand spinners can do so much with the craft. And when I go to craft shows, I have a little sampler where I show a bunch of different yarns. And I think it's inspiring to see, oh, wait a minute, I can do that with the punch needle. Oh, wait, I can do this, so yeah.
It seems like it would be a good way to use small amounts of yarn. If you had a design that only had a little bit of one color and you had a little bit of yarn that you didn't want to part with, but wasn't enough to make a whole something with, you could do it as just a little accent.
Oh, you bet. It's terrific for that. And I will often blend knitting yarn into my own piece. If you're using it to shade a flower or an individual motif and not the whole rug, it doesn't all have to be super durable yarn.
Are you still creating with this yourself?
I am. I was really excited to retire. Pretty much everything that I've made, when I started, it was commissions, and that I didn't have to tell anyone how I was doing it. But since I've been a teacher and making kits and doing YouTube videos and things, everything I've done, I've had the pleasure of showing how to do it. And that's a wonderful thing to get to do, a gift for me to get to do. But also it meant that everything I made, I had to keep really careful track of, okay, this flower I used a number 9 Oxford punch needle. And okay, I have to weigh all the yarn first so I can weigh it after to say how much yarn went in the kit. And I always have thought, when I retire, I can just make whatever I want and not have to tell anyone how I've done it. I can make it really complicated. I can just play, which is what my students have gotten to do. And I've always been jealous, it's sort of had punched vicariously, through them. And so I'm having a lot of fun now punching just for the sheer pleasure of it.
Now, you mentioned that you started a business in the 80s. When did the Oxford Company come to be?
So I started my first business, Red Clover Rugs, in 1985. And 1995 is when my first Oxford punch needle was made. And I sat down and did the math. I'm like, okay, now I'm teaching, making kits, doing commissions, selling supplies. Wait a minute, I could just sell my punch needle and do just as well financially with a fraction of the work. And in the beginning, we only wholesaled. So I started the Oxford Company in 1995, got my first website. And yeah.
Wow. So it is your 30th anniversary this year.
It is.
That's exciting. So it sounds like you are really able to move forward with the things that are working and let go of what didn't work in your business. Does that sound right to you?
I think that is true. Sometimes it takes me a while to admit, okay, well, this is a flop. But I've had some wonderful opportunities that I have realized really aren't good for me. At one point, when I had Red Clover Rugs and was making custom rugs, a gentleman came in who owned a chain of craft stores. Actually, no, he was about to open a chain of craft stores up and down the East Coast. There were a dozen stores, and he wanted me to come up with a line of 8 hooked rugs that he could sell in all of his stores. And I got so excited, and he asked me to make a prototype, and it could have been my big break. That's a lot of rugs for someone as small as I was. So I was just delighted with the idea, but I went home that night and just like, oh my God, this would be a nightmare. I'd have to hire more people. I'd have to buy hundreds of pounds of yarn. So I called up Preston McAdoo and I said, well, what do you think? This could be my big break, but on the other hand, it sounds kind of overwhelming. And he said, well, Amy, you have to decide whether you're going to run your business or whether you're going to let your business run you. And I think that's the best business advice I've ever gotten, honestly, is at every juncture, you have a choice, of how you want to be spending your days.
As we're speaking, it occurs to me that your work as an artist is so closely tied to your work as an entrepreneur, is so closely tied to your work as a teacher. And I'm not sure we give enough credit to a lot of artists for having these entrepreneurial I'm not sure if you liked the word ambitious, but I think maybe bold is a better word. Traits.
Well, someone said you're either really brave or too stupid to know any better. But, I started just doing one little thing at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no business experience whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But I took a class called Starting and Managing Your Own Small Business at the local Chamber of Commerce. And that was very helpful. My first loan, I had to write my business plan and prove to a bank that I could make it work. So I really learned as I went along.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out that I loved working on the computer. I loved figuring out how to make a business work. That part was really pretty fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could say my personal statement to myself. What's the word for that? My motto, I guess you could say, going into it was the famous "Unto thine own self be true." And that was really my guiding force. And my path has morphed and changed as things have worked and not worked for me. Kits are so labor intensive. I don't want to make kits anymore, for example.
Uh-huh.
And I found that I just loved figuring out how to make it all work. It's a bit of a puzzle.
Uh-huh.
And so important to be flexible, because a lot of my ideas, I thought they were great ideas and they fell flat on their face. Like, wouldn't it be great, for example, to make hooked rugs using polar fleece? Because it's sustainable. It's made out of recycled bottles to begin with. So it's double recycled when you make a rug out of it. And you could use it for bath mats. And nobody thought that was a good idea. So, well, never mind, scratch that. But, yeah.
And that's kind of not even thinking about the way that this craft and this endeavor has helped other people express themselves and enjoy passing their time. So, yeah, what a lot of fun and beauty.
It has been really fun. And I've loved the teacher certification program because it's set up to teach people not only how to teach, but also how to have their own small businesses if that's what they want while teaching. So it's to help them be better rug makers, fiber artists, whether they're making rugs, wall hangings, whatever, how to teach, and also how to make it all work as a small business in whatever capacity they want it to be.
One of the things I find really gratifying as a small business owner is knowing that if it's working, it's because it's fulfilling a need that other people have. It's not just that it's working, it's that it's working for somebody else too.
Yes. So. Yeah. Oh, I know exactly what you mean. And that's what's been so exciting about this, is that there really was a need. So I feel like I came along at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just really enjoyed watching it grow.
Well, and for everybody who's just discovering it now, there's a whole range of things to try. Amy, thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I love chatting with you.
I'll let you get back to your work for your own enjoyment now.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.